Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how book summaries can help publishers find new readers, and I think also new revenue. We're led today by Andrew Savikas, who's Chief Strategy Officer for getAbstract. He's also Chair of the Board for BISG's Board of Directors, and an important person in my life, but also in guiding the board and leading the organization. Andrew, welcome today. Thank you for arranging this webinar and for hosting the conversation that we're about to have.
Of course. Thank you, Brian. I'm thrilled to be here today. I've been, as you know, Brian, I've been part of publishing conferences and events for more than a decade. And one of the recurring themes that just keeps coming up at those events is discovery. The number of books published each year keeps getting bigger. So the challenge of helping readers find those books keeps getting bigger too. Now, of course, a big part of what a publisher can do to improve discoverability has to do with technical things like metadata. Something BISG and its metadata committee work really hard to improve. But a lot, though not all, of the conversations about book marketing and discoverability, like how better metadata can improve SEO, assume the situation of one customer looking for a book. Today, we're going to take a closer look at another kind of discovery tool, one that can be exceptionally effective at bringing books and the ideas and insights within them to people who aren't necessarily looking for a book at all. So first today, I'm going to provide a little bit of an overview of the book summaries market and ecosystem with a focus on their use in a corporate context. And after that, you'll hear from our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment, who will each speak to a different perspective on the role book summaries can play for customers, authors, and of course, publishers. And of course, finally, we'll open up the floor to questions from you in the audience, which you're welcome to put directly into the Zoom chat or Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to get to all of them before wrapping up today. Before I introduce our panelists, I just want to take a brief look and talk a bit about the overall book summaries landscape. Broadly speaking, there are kind of two main categories of companies that summarize books commercially. First, there are those that primarily focus on individual customers, more of a B2C kind of offering. There's actually dozens of them. Most of them are relatively small operations. Three notable examples are InstaRead, Shortform, and SumMizeIt. These services usually have about 1,000 or fewer summaries in their library and offer them via low-price subscription to individuals. Most notably, companies like this don't actually formally license the rights from publishers to produce the summaries, which most publishers would actually categorize as derivative works that would require a license to do it properly. The second category of summary companies is the one that we're going to be focusing most of our time on today, and that's providers who do actually work directly with publishers, including formally licensing the rights to produce the summaries, and often working directly with authors and with publishers on co-marketing activities like webinars or interviews. My employer, you see the sign behind me, getAbstract, is the largest summary provider, but there are others like SoundView. I also believe that EBSCO is another that has a book summaries offering as well. Another distinction with companies like SoundView or getAbstract is that we put a big focus on corporate sales, which, as you'll hear in a bit, opens up some very interesting ways to reach new readers, as well as drive book sales and increase exposure for authors. As one example, getAbstract recently commissioned a survey of both summary subscribers and non-subscribers. And as one relevant data point, 92% of subscribers agreed that book summaries expose them to authors and books they might not have considered before. And 76% of respondents said that the summaries increase the likelihood they would buy a book. And while there's certainly an open question about correlation versus causation, subscribers reported buying nearly 20 books in the past 12 months, more than double that reported by non-subscribers. And also notable from the same survey results, 72% of subscribers to a summary service said that summary service was the most influential resource for them in their book purchases in the past 12 months. The book summaries I'm talking about are typically produced by professional writers and are usually designed to be read or listened to, as the case may be, in about 10 or 15 minutes. And when selling a summary service in the corporate context, we're typically engaging with a company's learning and development or L&D function or with the HR team. Now, before we dive into the discussion, let me start by introducing our fantastic panelists for today's webinar. Joining me today first is Dennis Budinich. He's the Chief Culture Officer at Investors Bank. Dennis has been developing engaging learning programs for many years, especially within the financial services industry. Also on our panel today is Dan Pontefract, a leadership strategist, best-selling author, and the founder of the Pontefract Group. Dan has written 4 books, including Lead, Care, Win, and Open to Think. And finally, many of you already know our third panelist for today. From her work as chair of BISG's Rights Committee, Kris Kliemann is the president of Kleman and Company, a rights and licensing consultant to publishers. Prior to founding her own consulting firm, Kris was vice president and director of global rights with Wiley Inc. So welcome to our panelists. And Dennis, I'm going to start with you. You've said when we talked previously that you use book summaries at Investors Bank to help foster a learning mindset. Can you talk a little bit about some of those initiatives that you use the summaries to do?
Yeah, sure. In banking, at least in the metropolitan area, cultures are built on service, so they're service driven, serve the client, make the sale serve it. And I've worked for many of the big banks in the area as a consultant and as an employee running sales programs. And there's very little emphasis on education. They'll have training, but not education. And so I made a decision that at Investors Bank, I had the responsibility of deciding what's the culture. And we decided that the culture is going to be, the foundation of our culture is going to be learning, teaching our employees that you need to continue to learn. And you can learn through maybe a sales training, but in my personal opinion, there's nothing better than going into a book, because then you could understand the whys. Why is this important? I could go deep. So at the bank, we started 10 years ago with getAbstract, and we started doing little programs like getting our sales team and sending them a series of abstracts and say, read these 5 abstracts, answer these 20 questions, and you have a week to do it. I mean, this was like mandatory work. But what was happening is as the people were reading the abstracts, they started to have conversation. They started to have meetings, and they say, hey, can we talk about this? Can we do abstract meetings? Because I have some thoughts I want to share. I have an idea. And that dawned on me, well, these abstracts are creating dialogue on topics that I could choose. If I want to talk about teamwork, I pick some abstracts on teamwork. If I want to talk about diversity and inclusion, I give them a couple abstracts on diversity and inclusion. There's the conversation. So we took that, and for the last 10 years, we just continued to build activity after activity after activity that continues to drive self-education. Make that decision. You're responsible. So I lead them to the book using abstract.
Right.
So they gained some knowledge, and they said it was pretty good. Okay. And we have an electronic library, so they could go on and get the book electronically, read it. And if they like it, I'll buy them a hardcover book. And we have a budget to buy every employee 5 books a year. Mm-hmm. So that's been a major foundation of education, although we have other training programs, but that's the foundation.
Sure. Thank you. And of course, now besides introducing people to books, as you talked about, they'll read the summary, decide they want the book, and you've got budget to pay for that. I also know the summaries often introduce the companies to authors as well. Can you talk a bit about your experience with Jeb Blunt and his book, Sales EQ?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I'll talk about 2. We have the sales EQ, but then we had the Fred Factor. This is where I started to, so the Fred Factor is like a 60-page book, 70-page book. You can read it in a weekend. Well, I put our top 75 executives from the chairman of the board down to senior VPs through a 7-week program on that book. We studied every chapter. And the goal was, how do we create a culture of Freds? And if you know anything about a Fred is generous, a Fred is kind, a Fred treats each other like family. They go out of their way to help each other. And we weren't experiencing that much. So my boss said, what are we going to do about it? We're going to get all the executives to sit in a room and pick this apart. And how do we become Freds? And we actually have the Fred Award. We have that. So then I invited Mark Sanborn in to do a presentation for us. And that started that whole concept. So then I had to do a sales program. And we started looking at different companies, and I'm like, nothing's really getting me. I'm not satisfied with what I'm seeing. So I went on getAbstract. I said, okay, I want to look at different sales books, because most of my programs are based on books. I'll take Think and Grow Rich, which I've been teaching for 35 years. I took that book and I made a 15-week personal development program out of Think and Grow Rich. And that's how I built the business. So I got it, and I found Sales EQ. I was like, what is this about? And I read it. I read the abstract, and I knew we're going to build our sales culture on this book. So I created a 12-week program based on Sales EQ. And then I decided, wouldn't it be cool if we could have our 300 people that went through the training to meet Jeb in person? And then we had the pandemic, so we did it virtually. So we actually brought him in, and then we did 2 events for our business clients because I was so impressed with Jeb's content. And we just did 2 last year, and we had over, I think it was 1,900 businesses attend to both of them from the metropolitan area. I mean, so, and it all started with an abstract. I wouldn't have known about the book. You know, I just went in and I put sales, and sales EQ popped up.
Right, absolutely. You know, one example I found particularly interesting was another example, a workshop that you put together for executives about networking skills. Can you talk a bit about why you did that and what the results were?
Well, our mortgage company, when the pandemic started, you know, it was all hard because they were busy, but at the same time they couldn't prospect. And so I got Jeb's book, Fanatical Prospecting, and I built this whole networking program based on that book. It was a 10-week program. We had every business development officer and mortgage lender go through it. So it's about 200 people. Mm-hmm. And we saw sales go up. And the way we measured it was not refinancing. It was new home purchases. New home purchases is something you get through a relationship. Refinancing, people call the bank for refinancing. So we saw new home mortgages go up about 35% from just doing a kind of a book club on steroids. You know, right. It's more than just a book club. So we'll spend 2 hours a week for 10 weeks just talking about the chapter and how do we apply it and what are the obstacles and you know, what do we need to practice? And we built it right into a sales curriculum. So the different pieces that come out of the book, the sales managers made that part of practice, like blocking out time. Every week you need to block out time to make phone calls. Every week you need to do this. All of that came from the book, mm-hmm. which started with the abstract. Right, so I keep on connecting it because I'll search through abstracts all the time to find something that kind of gets me going. I say, okay, if it's getting me going, then I could get it going with other people if it gets me excited. So that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great example of, you know, how the having the summary available helps you find the stuff that's going to make the most sense, because ultimately, as you described, you really have to customize the material for your context and your company. And you know, that's not a small amount of work to do. And this way you have some more confidence that the book you've selected is really going to make sense for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I just had one more thing. When we do a program, we'll put people in teams of 3. And so that team has to present the chapter to the group. So if there's 20 chapters, we're having 20 presentations over a 10-week period. And so the team has to figure out application, not Dennis. Mm-hmm. You read the chapter, teach your peers how to use this. So we have a top mortgage lender taking a chapter, and then he's teaching other mortgage lenders, this is how I would use this. So I really just let it foster because I don't know their business as well as they do. So they look at the chapter and say, how could I use this? And then they have to create a PowerPoint. We give them a template, and then they present it to their peers. And that's kind of where the power is, because they have to think it through. And the whole thing is for them to think about this stuff. It's, you know, slow down and think about how to make things better. Yep. Sometimes we're too busy just working, and we don't sharpen a saw. So what I'm trying to do is slow people down, sharpen the way you think, and you'll work less hard and get better results. And that's been working for us for a long time. So they keep on giving me more of a budget, and they say, keep on doing it. I just keep on running with it.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you. I think it's just important because I think a lot of us tend to think about, I know this was true for me, you know, before I really understood the way these summaries are used is you think about, you know, trying to sell to a reader or maybe some bulk sales or corporate sales. But, you know, really, I think it's important to understand there's a lot of nuance in how this content is used in the context of a corporate training and development kind of program. You know, you said something once that really stuck with me, which is you said that summaries provide, quote, enough information for a conversation to happen, unquote. Can you share an example of what you mean by that?
Well, you know, we had a couple of departments, you know, they'll call me up and say, listen, you know, I have some we have internal surveys that we do every 2 weeks. So employees get to evaluate their peers, and we select 100 people every 2 weeks randomly. And if somebody gets a poor survey, they'll call me up and say, you know, things aren't clicking in my department. What do you recommend? I said, let's go and get abstract. What do you think it is? They're not, you know, is there conflict? is they don't know how to work together. And so we'll pick a topic and then we'll look at the getAbstracts and I'll build a 1-hour meeting around an abstract. And they'll refer to the abstract, they'll refer to the book, but there's enough information there where you could do it in an hour. You could have a good conversation in an hour. And we ask people, we'll give the abstract before the meeting, read the abstract, highlight some areas that you found interesting that you think is worth discussing. And it's interesting because they'll pick something and I'll say, why did you pick that? Well, because our team doesn't do that. That's why I picked that. And we need to do that. Oh, so you've noticed from the book that there's something that you would like to see your team doing. See, and how would you get that information? It's hard to get that information because it's spontaneous. Yeah. So the abstract opens up dialogue that the stuff comes out. Like it just comes out. It comes out right in that moment. But it was something that was there for maybe years, but it fell out and now you could have a conversation and you could fix things.
Right.
And so we're doing the same thing with diversity and inclusion. We do an abstract, all of a sudden people say things. It's like, wow, how long do you feel this way? Since I've been here. Wow, okay, let's work on it. So it's enough to spark conversation.
Right.
That's how I use it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to shift gears and ask for some input from Dan, who, certainly is an author, but I think you have some additional perspective to share in that, in your career, you've spent time as a chief learning officer in this kind of environment of working to bring programs to employees. And certainly, I mean, it's of course delightful, Dennis, to hear you say great things about getAbstract, but of course there are other providers out there. And I think, Dan, you've had experience with others as well. And again, the overall message here is understanding, how book summaries complement the books themselves and how they're used in a very specific way in this kind of context. And Dan, it'd be great if you could, building on what Dennis said, maybe share a bit of your experience from your time, as a chief learning officer, what you did to incorporate, books certainly, but more specifically summaries into your learning programs.
Andrew, thanks. First, however, I think I'd like to work for Dennis because he really seems to know what he's doing over there. And yeah, very eerily similar. As a chief learning officer, I'm looking after 50,000 odd employees in terms of their level of competence, their ability to lead, their ability to be a team member, all facets of employee engagement, culture, flexible work styles, you kind of name it, at two big companies over basically a 10-year period. And my thoughts on being a CLO don't really differ from being an author. And that is, I'm a huge believer in multimodal opportunities for the learner. And book summaries, quite frankly, are part of that. So if I have my CLO hat on, I use book summaries as ways in which to, just as Dennis eloquently described, to get to the user either as an opportunity to discern a particular area and to uncover that. And that might be through a short little coaching session. That might be through a package of learning events. And that may introduce me, as Dennis has alluded to, other authors or authors themselves to then bring them in. It's part of a multimodal approach. And again, you can do so much in sort of a 7, 8, 9 page summary or so from a book that might be somewhere between 35 and 90,000 words. And that's not to discredit the book, because of course, as an author, I haven't written 4 of them. Would love people to go a little deeper in a book, but I'm also pragmatic to know that not everyone can invest the 35,000 to 90,000 word book. So you have to kind of be pragmatic, put your hat on as a CLO and for me as an author and say, well, where do you want to meet the learner, the reader, the individual? And I think for me, at least as a CLO, those book summaries helped immensely. Now, if I put my author hat on, nothing really has changed. Although I'm no longer a CLO, what I view, however, getAbstract in particular here, is the book summary of the 4 books are ways in which to reach the Dennises, to reach other potential learners. And as I've said before on another getAbstract webinar, I believe in a declaration of purpose that I came up with about 13 years ago. And it's as follows: we're not here to see through each other, we're here to see each other through. And for me, a book summary allows me to reach someone else through means in which I might not be able to, be that with a workshop, a keynote, writing I might do on Forbes or wherever. And that's why I believe that if you're an author, if you're not using book summaries as a way in which to potentially reach a different type of learner or audience, then kind of shame on you. And don't look at it as a way in which that cannibalizes, your book or your online learning program or whatever else you might be doing. It's actually complementary. In fact, I think that it behooves you to actually put your might behind the promotion of summaries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that the sort of the big C word, cannibalization. I think Kris, you've made that reference as well. But it's a lot of times when I do describe to people what what I do and what summaries do, people are concerned. Well, aren't they people just going to read the summary instead of reading the book, or specifically what they mean instead of buying the book? And it sounds like from your perspective, that's not really a concern that you have as an author.
Yeah. I mean, Kris may loathe what I'm going to say next, but I'm not necessarily as interested in book sales as maybe a publisher might be. I'm a realist, and that is, I have a fair share of an audience. I'd like to grow that. Sure, why not? Would I like more book sales? Why not? Sure. But you don't make a heck of a lot of money as a leadership or nonfiction author unless you're some sort of celebrity. So with the realist hat on as an author, I use the book as a way in which, as many have said before me, to brand and be part of a business card that's rather large and sometimes weighty. The book summary from getAbstract, all four indeed, have complemented that notion, that pitch, that positioning. I feel that I'm part of a special club that the books have been summarized by getAbstract. And it has a cachet, not cliche, a cachet that, oh, getAbstract has taken the time to invest their editors to actually command or to authorize a book summary. I feel part of a club. And so for me, I use that in part of my branding and hey, getAbstract summaries. Go invest in a membership and you can get the 8-page summary of Lead, Care, Win or Open to Think. I just think it's part of me now.
Yeah, I'm also glad you mentioned that point about how, of course you want to sell books, but that's not the only thing that you are selling. And you're selling your ideas and you're selling your expertise. And certainly it's something I recall from my time. Early in my career, I worked at a technology publisher, and a similar dynamic at play where people don't and still don't write computer books to make money. They write them to, get consulting gigs and get promotions and build a reputation. I've certainly heard that a lot of people, especially who write business books and others, they're not writing the books to make the money per se. It's really about building that brand and reputation. It sounds like that's also true for you. It's really about getting your name out there.
For me, a book, and no pun intended, I suppose, but maybe it is to get the word out of what I believe in. Book summaries like getAbstract is a way in which to get the word out in a manageable, reasonable, summarized way that, again, might help a different type of learner that's not interested in a book, be it one that's read to them by an audio file or in an EPUB version. So for me, I just honestly believe that it's complementary. And again, if I put my chief learning officer and chief envisioner hat back on, I want to reach as many employees as possible in varying ways of how they learn. Multimodal approaches, inclusive of kind of getAbstract summaries, allows the learner then to say, oh, so I don't have to sit in that course about Open to Think. I could read the 8-page summary. Fantastic. And that means I've reached another individual. That means I've done my job because as I've said, my purpose is to help others get through the day.
Got it. Absolutely. Kris, I saw you nodding a bit while Dan was talking, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that, the sort of the big C word, as you described, in cannibalization. And you spent a lot of time at Wiley, and I know you've been involved were involved at the time with their initiatives with various summary kind of providers, and would love to kind of hear your perspective on that question about, is this something that takes away from sales or threatens book sales?
Well, I think, thank you. Anyway, you guys, I don't even know why I need to say anything, because I think you two have made it very clear what the advantages are of having an abstract out there. But I will tell you, there were times when I worked in rights departments at publishers. I didn't only work at Wiley, I worked elsewhere. And I know from talking to publishers now that the focus on actually a couple different kinds of rights deals can be about cannibalization, you know, and it's very strange to me. I mean, none of us, I said this to Andrew the other day, none of us do this to keep our books and our ideas a secret. We are publishers. We are not privishers, as someone once told me, you know, right? We're not trying to hide stuff. And down the hall in your publicity department, they're working really hard to get somebody, anybody, come on, somebody, talk about this book, write about this book, say something about this book, be an influencer, you know, get the word out. And in a rights team, you come up with these nice, legal, straightforward, with proper limitations, non-exclusive deals. And every now and then somebody in the background is going, you know, I just think if you license that summary, then they're not going to buy the book. And I love all these examples where you see that indeed it can be fostering the possibility that somebody will buy a book. I know with getAbstract, there were very often reports we saw that indicated the number of click-throughs, for example, that people who read the summary were clicking through. We had international salespeople who were really happy when a getAbstract summary would be promoted in an international English language newspaper, and that might be an opportunity then for that English language book to sell more in those territories. We all, as publishers of business books, want to get into corporate sales. You know, now I'm going to say this, it's probably going to create a problem for Dennis, but we don't have reps who go to Dennis's office and open up the catalog and sell him the whole list. He doesn't want to see those people. He's got work to do. So don't send your reps over to Dennis. Think about the fact that he can find those books via the getAbstract catalog and then come to you and buy books on behalf of his employees, or build whole programs around the books on behalf of his employees. I mean, that's, I think, super impressive. So I would say, you know, you're working with a legitimate license. There's an exchange of value for value. You're trying to make sure that your book has as extensive a reach as possible. And the opportunities for using the summaries, this is another thing that I often would think about and use in a couple different ways. Once you have a summary of a book, within a publishing company, it can be a useful tool, let's say, for even licensing other rights. Maybe you want to give that short summary out to potential translation rights buyers. You want to entice them. You know, we're salespeople as rights people as well. So there's a whole sales flow. I meet you, I tell you about the book. I hope I get you interested. I send you some copy about what the book will be and who the author is and what that's going to be like. Then maybe I send you the summary. Then maybe, you know, each time I'm trying to make sure that I'm capturing your interest, and now I'll send you the book based on the summary. You've said, yes, this will fit in my program. I'd like to know more. I'll read the book now, and ideally make you an offer for translation rights. So I think there are other opportunities for use of the summary sort of outside of the getAbstract subscription.
Sure. And Kris, I know you talked about, you know, there's a rights, you know, there's value given, value received in the situation. There's you know, contracts in place typically, you know, with the kind of providers, you know, like getAbstract, SoundView, these other EBSCO. And yet there are also a lot of companies popping up. There's new ones all the time. And I'm sure you've experienced this, where all of a sudden there's a summary out there that you didn't license and it shows up there. And I'd love to get your perspective on, you know, on how important it is for these things to be done, you know, appropriately with contracts and licenses, and what, you know, what your thinking was when you would see these things pop up and, you know, sort of on some website somewhere with a summary that you didn't authorize and you don't really have a lot of visibility into.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, I'm always operating from a sort of theory of abundance, but a non-licensed summary that's picking up significant parts of the author's content is not a legal derivative. And depending on your company's practice or your own personal practice, that is something to be noted and flagged. I think, that's just to me another instance of piracy, and companies have different ways of dealing with piracy.
Sure.
I'm always about, get that guy to take off his black hat and put on a white one, and let's turn it into something legitimate.
Right.
But yeah, it's not a good practice to simply pick up the first 7 paragraphs of every chapter and call it an abstract.
Right. Fair enough. Now, Kris, you mentioned that you don't typically have, or a publisher wouldn't typically have reps going and calling on someone like Dennis. It's neither practical nor is it convenient for Dennis. And yet, Dennis, it does sound like you do have mechanisms in place to facilitate book purchases. Be they, individual employees they've got a budget and they can ask for them. I assume also that you do probably some bulk orders on occasion. What is that? What are the different ways that the bank itself facilitates book purchases as part of supporting the programs that you're running?
Yeah, so we are big promoters of book clubs, and they're very organized. It's not like, well, we get together and read the book. I actually will take it upon myself to create a workbook for every book club book that we do. So this is the workbook for the Fred Factor. And then we have the workbook for Fanatical Prospector. So any activity or any anything that Jeb says you should try because it'll be valuable, the exercise is in the book. So I extract from the book activities, right? So we have right now about 20 book clubs in the bank, different topics. IT has another book, customer service. And so every team will say, hey, I want to do a book club. I have a budget. They tell me how many employees. If I have time, I'll do a workbook for them, which we usually always do a workbook for them. And then they do it. So I take it out of my budget. We have an online library, the same as the municipality would have. We bought the same library. We have about 2,000 books. You take it off the shelf, you have to put it back on the shelf in 30 days. But I tell people, if you like the book and it's a keeper, we have a philosophy at the bank. If you want to reach the top shelf in life, you stand on the books you read. You have to stand on the books you read. And so I talk about that all the time. I do a motivational show 2 days a week for all employees. I'm always talking about self-education, value to the marketplace. And the only way you do that is through education, and you have to take care of that. So we have the electronic library. People will go from the abstract to the electronic library. If they really like the book, all they have to do is email me, and we go to Amazon and we ship the book right to the house. And I just shipped out 30 books last week because people started off the year with wanting to read 6 books this year. They have to be business related, but that's fine. They'll get books on personal development, communication, stress management, all kinds of stuff. And it's fine. We put it right in the LMS, goes on our transcript. And so it's a proactive part of our culture. It's not a good idea. No, you have to do it. You have to be a book club. You have to do this. And then I get emails all the time saying, I haven't read a book since high school. Now I'm reading books and it's changing my life. And my wife and I are reading the book. And it's inspiring to see people changing their habits and becoming a reader. And someone yesterday said, Dennis, you love reading. And I said, what are you, out of your mind? I hate reading. I don't like reading. But I understand the value of reading. And you have to like it if you want to create value in the marketplace. You just have to do it. So I tell people all the time, I don't like reading. I'd rather take a nap. But I read 12 books a year because I understand value to the marketplace, value to your employer, and value to your personal life comes through reading books. So it's always about the book. The abstract is kind of the connection between them and the book. But it's always get the book. Don't stop at the abstract.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Dan, I'm curious from your perspective as an author, as I mentioned to Kris, there's a lot of a lot of other companies out there, that are producing summaries. What's your perspective on evaluating the quality of the summary being produced? And do you look at those and do you pay attention to what's out there? And how do you think about it as an author about whether these things are, whether someone is representing your material sort of accurately and responsibly?
Mm. Well, again, first, I still think that Dennis needs to be Chief Culture Officer of the Year for the next decade, but we'll come back to that. Again, if I have my CLO hat on, what I have done in the past, I've looked at sort of purview, outreach. What are they trying to do now in a particular bend? If you're an engineering R&D company, for example, you may want access to academic papers are summarized. So there are ways for you to maybe use a service that for your R&D or engineers that you actually want the crazy academic papers that have been out there for years that are 88 pages long. You want 4 pages. Okay, well, maybe that's not getAbstract for you because you have a different need for your audience. You have, like anything, you have to do a learner analysis essentially. What is it that we require? And then if I'm looking at getAbstract with its array, right, of sales, marketing, leadership, culture, the gamut that is professional development, I would say, then I'm looking at that saying, okay, well, if I'm in an organization that is full of leaders or up and coming leaders, or we're all about culture, or we're all about sales and marketing, and I take a look at that comparative to maybe some of your competitors in the same space, I'd say, well, you know what, there's a greater array here. And look, the way in which that they present mobile, right? Downloadables, there's add-ons, there's webcast series. They actually have author meet and greets. I've been privileged to be in several dinners and lunches and breakfasts with getAbstract account execs and their teams in Boston and New York and Washington, and I get to meet some of your customers. So that as a CLO, thinking, oh, you've got other opportunities to actually engage with the getAbstract team. Fantastic. So I would just look at what is your learner need? What type of book array or summary array do you have? What are the other add-ons from a CLO perspective for your audience? And then if I'm an author, I'm almost asking the same questions. And again, I, as an author, have been approached by your competitors. Can we, authorize
of course.
the book, right? And I'm like, no, that's not. You're not working for me, frankly speaking. So, to each their own. But that's my take.
Great, thank you. So, Kris, you mentioned one example of how publishers can use summaries themselves if they have them, from wherever the source they have them. One example was, helping support translation rights. Are there other examples of how publishers either do or maybe could use these more effectively for their own purposes?
I can't say off the top of my head that I'm aware of other ways they are used. I would say when people are talking about promoting their backlist, for example, or have an opportunity to be in front of a corporate buyer of some kind. I mean, there are people who approach companies all the time to sell books. So we all use different distributors to try and do that. But when you're talking about an older book or a certain kind of sale, a kind of account you're going into, I think it's really handy to have those short versions that give the taster that are enough to entice somebody. I also really want to pick up on something Dan said, which is this idea of multimodality is really important. I read everything. I read the back of the cereal box if there's not a book in front of me, So I'm really happy that there are ways for me to know stuff and learn stuff when it might not be possible for me to be spending the big time commitment or even holding a piece of paper in my hand, right? So here comes audio. That's a good idea for me in certain kinds of situations. I'm standing in line and I'm flipping through my phone anyway. Please take me out of the doom scroll and give me something useful so that I can read the getAbstract piece. That kind of thing I think is really important to catch people where they are. But to go back, that's just me as a reader. I think to go back into the sort of company mindset, I would say helping people, your own salespeople within your organization, to understand what is it they have on that backlist in terms of being able to sell into certain categories of titles. Is it a leadership book? Here's some things about our leadership titles. Is it a sales book? Here's some things about our sales titles. Those are, I think, good uses of the abstracts themselves.
Okay, thank you. Well, I do want to make sure we have time to take some questions that already have been some answered, but I was hoping before then, Dennis, if you don't mind, I know you shared with me earlier just a brief couple slides that supported a program you put together, and I was hoping you'd share just because I think it's such a great example of the work that people like you do to take the concepts and ideas from books and customize them and tailor them and put them into a program that's meant for your specific company and your specific environment. And I think it's just a great example for publishers and authors to see, how the ideas from their books ultimately do get sort of translated and filtered into these kind of learning programs.
Yeah, sure. So what we had was a little bit about the bank. We have about 175 branches, and we have teams of 5 to 8 per branch. And the struggle that the organization had for a while was, how do we have a continuous learning program for our employees? And so a couple of years ago, come up with this concept of quick starts. And they're 15 to 20-minute meetings in a day to kind of start the day. And could be motivational. It could be an abstract that the manager felt was valuable to start discussion. So it worked so well that I created a 52-week program that we are rolling out this week. And it's 4 modules. Each module covers 3 months. And if you look here, each week of the month is tied to a monthly theme. So the theme for the first month of module 1 is sales. And then the theme for the second month is customer service, and then professional and personal development. Module 2 will repeat. The first week will be sales, customer service, professional development, sales, customer service, professional development. Each week, I put an assignment in the learning management system, the LMS, that each employee goes in, and there's what we call the shot of knowledge. That's from getAbstract. And they'll read an abstract that's tied directly to sales. The first one they're going to be reading is Jeb's sales EQ. Now, this is frontline. These people have not gone through a program. So for the most part, many of these people, this may be the first time they're reading a getAbstract. They print the abstract. I create a worksheet with 2 or 3 questions. They prepare it, and they come to a Thursday or Friday meeting, branch meeting. And they discuss the abstract, the points we're talking about, things they could do to practice that comes out of the abstract. These meetings are meant to go no longer than 30 minutes. And then the next week would be a learning module. It might be a webinar. It might be a video I want them to watch. There'll be 2 questions to answer. And then they have their weekly meeting, educational meeting, a video, like a learning module that we might get off YouTube, or we might get through our learning programs that we have. And then we have skill of the month. And you can see here, this is all prepared. So for our managers and for our team leaders, just follow the bouncing ball. That's it. Just, you don't have to create something. You're running your business.
Right.
But this is a 20 to 30-minute module. And my thought is, a little bit frequently is better than a lot infrequently. It's just the thought of the week. It's just spoon feeding, dropping in. Sales for 4 weeks, service for 4 weeks, personal development for 4 weeks. Now let's start all over again. Sales for 4 weeks. And so if we look at the studies on how people learn, this is how people learn. And then each week, the manager has to put in an activity into the learning system saying, this is the activity we're going to practice this week based on the abstract. We're going to ask the customer 2 questions, or we're going to do whatever it is, whatever's tied to that abstract. They now are proactive. And, we have 160 some odd branches. Each manager is going to do it a little different. It's okay. Just use your personality. And we created it in a way where they could choose anyone in the branch to facilitate this. It's easy enough that they could ask a teller, you facilitate the meeting this week. And so now we're teaching people how to present. And it's all based on simple things. And, and the abstract is a perfect fit for this. I built this around the abstract. Using the abstract, I said, this is a perfect tool to build this out. So this will go, so we're doing it just for retail right now, but I've gotten calls from the president saying, "Are we doing corporate?"
Yep.
And I'm like, "All right, let me roll this out, and then we'll do corporate." So
Okay.
this is a great product.
Great. Thank you, Dennis.
You're welcome.
Okay, Brian, I'm happy to field some questions now. Looks like we have a few
Well,
in the.
Yep. So one from George Logan, one of our members, is asking about the role that other short forms of media, he mentions Vines, but I'm sure you can think of others, play a role in summaries and abstracts. I mean, it sounds like there's opportunities to layer in multiple ways to reach specific audiences.
Yeah, I'll comment briefly, but then I'd love to hear from Dan. I know you mentioned multimodal experiences earlier, but I'll just say that that's something that certainly we are looking very closely at. Is we've been doing text summaries for a long time and added audio summaries within the last few years. But in especially as we've all experienced in this pandemic, in the age of viral TikTok videos, I think there's opportunity to think differently about how else can you present the ideas and insights from books and other sources in multimodal ways. So it's not something that we at getAbstract are doing today, although it's something we'd like to do in the future. But I would also love to hear, Dan, because you mentioned multimodal in particular, sort of what your perspective is on what role kind of short form videos or Vines or TikTok style content might have in this ecosystem.
Yeah, meet your audience in the park, wherever the park may be, I guess, right? So is that TikTok? Why not? I created, as an example, to this book you see to the left, which is really shameless plugging, isn't it? The book is 9 leadership lessons, and I went and did a 2-minute video excerpt, reading from each of the 9 lessons, and drip that out over the course of the lead up to the book. And now they're available, and people can hear me, see me from a beach, read 2 minutes of a book. And that went on YouTube, that went out to Instagram Live, you kind of name it. So again, I believe in multimodal. What are other ways you could do it? Sure. Are there Vines? Why not? The book itself, I created a 16-hour online leadership development platform. And again, each of the 9 lessons are sub-compartmentalized, so you could just grab a little bit here or the big package. So again, it behooves, I think, authors of this day and age to look at not a book, but a platform. And then you can use different ways in which to get that message out.
Can I just add one thought to that? It's interesting because every book that we use, I try to find a YouTube video of the author doing some kind of presentation. And what it does is when you introduce that concept to the audience, it makes the book a person. It's not just a book. It's a person expressing 5-6 years of investment. They're pouring their heart out to give us education. And every time I'll ask people in the audience, what do you think now after you see what the author looks like and sounds like? They're like, it's real. You're making the book real. And so another thing about this is even with the abstract, if we could find the video, and we try to tie the video to the abstract to make it real. It's not just paper. So.
Great.
I'll give just one other quick example, if you don't mind. So this book.
Oh, that was clever.
Thank you.
Wow.
Well, in this case, we think about, because I thought about Dennis's point. You've got keynotes that are 30 minutes, 45, 60, 90 minutes. Why is TED so popular? TED's popular because it's 18 minutes or less. So when I was asked to do a TED for Open to Think, the thing's been viewed and it's on the TED.com site like thousands of times. So although you might say, oh, Dan's giving away the book, oh, Dan's giving away 90-minute keynotes, it's another 18-minute way in which to convey what it is that you're yapping about in the book itself.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Dan. That's something that's come up a few times in my own conversations. Is that's exactly the example of TED Talks, because I can't imagine an author or publisher turning down the opportunity to do a TED Talk about their book. And what they're doing is they're condensing the key ideas into 18, 20 minutes. And that's exactly what a summary has the potential to do. And I don't think anyone's worried their TED Talk, as you pointed out, I don't think anyone's worried the TED Talk's going to replace the book sales.
Exactly.
Brian?
Another question, and it's kind of related to something, Andrew, that you started with right at the beginning, is that some content is not actually licensed or formally licensed. And so Peter Palazzari is asking the question of Kris, what's the line there? I mean, what's acceptable use and what constitutes piracy? And how do you interpret that?
Hello, I'm not a lawyer. I think there's probably a huge amount of nuance to that, and I am likely not fully qualified to answer. We could all agree on the gross violations. So when I said take the first 7 paragraphs from each chapter and slap them in and put them into a quote summary and then sell it to somebody, that's probably inappropriate. There's a difference between a review and plagiarism. And again, I think it's probably more nuanced than just like, I can give you the exact direct line on this. But again, if someone is selling something that isn't his'n, it's rhymes with prison. That's where I want to go.
Got it. Thank you.
Andrew, another question. We have a couple of questions actually related to Blinkist. Do you want to maybe provide a perspective on getAbstract versus some of its competition and what the differentiating factors are?
Yeah, happy to. And again, we're certainly supportive of we think summaries are an important part of the ecosystem, and we welcome the fact that there's other folks out there doing this. Someone mentioned Blinkist. They're a company out of Germany, fairly well-funded, venture capital funded company that really focuses on more of a consumer audience. As I mentioned earlier, it's really, at least from what I've seen of their sort of marketing and promotion, it's really aimed at individual readers and talking about saving time, and that's great. I mean, there may be a place for that, and I know that I think originally I don't think they were particularly engaged with publishers. I think that's changed over the years. I think they are working more directly with publishers, and even offering sales of audiobooks, which I think is a great part of a good user experience as well. So I think the difference from what you've heard today is, with getAbstract and some of the ones we've talked more about today are more focused on supporting folks like Dennis in providing material to support those corporate learning programs, for example. And getAbstract has customer success managers who spend time curating reading lists and working with learning managers to come up with programs and really doing the kind of custom work that a company really needs, as opposed to providing more of an individual service to end users. I don't know. It looks like one of the questions was specifically for authors. I don't know if Dan, if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is I don't think they necessarily purport what they position, i.e., 15 minutes or less. I think it's a bad marketing proposition, personally speaking. I get that it's another competitor to getAbstract, and I'm not negating the fact that there should be competition, by the way.
Sure.
But to me, what they're positioning doesn't actually do credence to what it is that they offer. You can't read a book in 15 minutes.
Right. And just as another note is as by way of comparison, getAbstract has, I think we have 22,000 summaries in 7 different languages. And again, it's intended to support global companies with significant needs like that. And I'm not aware of any other provider that has a library that large. Brian, do you have other questions?
Yeah, George Logan was asking, in a different vein, is a book summary, maybe not necessarily a getAbstract summary, but are book summaries of appropriate texts capable of being used to teach a high school or a college course? Or is it, that's not really the purpose?
Yeah, I would say no. I'm not aware of people using him in that context. Certainly I've heard of customers who are, a professor may assign something as a recommended reading or that sort of thing, but I'm not familiar with summaries being used specifically to teach a course.
Okay. And this is kind of a mechanical thing. Frank McDermott, who works with Wiley, one of our members, is asking about identification. How are you selling the abstracts? Are they identified with an ISBN or a DOI or something similar?
That's a good question. They don't receive ISBNs. I don't know if we're producing DOIs on the back end, but I'd be certainly happy to find out.
Great. And I think you talked a little bit about this after the question came in, but are rights deals being made with traditional publishers? Dennis, I think you used an example of some books from Wiley. And Andrew, maybe you can talk more globally about the companies that you typically do business with.
Sure. Yeah. We certainly do. And the specific terms can vary with publishers, as you might expect. I mean, depending on if it's a very popular, well-known author, might look different from someone who's brand new in the game in terms of what those relationships might look like. That said, we tend to view the summaries as, we position it and reinforce it as it's a marketing and discovery tool for the publishers. And certainly, the arrangement that how we look at it is, we are willing to and happy to invest the non-trivial resources to produce the summary. We hire high quality writers and we have a significant QA process, and we have a global sales team, and we have customer success team, and we have marketing efforts, and we do media partnerships with newspapers and magazines all over the world, and we put a lot of investment in things that support the exposure that these summaries get. And that's really, where we feel like the crux of the value to the publisher comes is from the exposure that they're getting. And ultimately, we try whenever possible to demonstrate where, as Kris alluded to, where we can show people are clicking through to buy the book, and people are booking the author, and they are buying the sales. And so it's I think the real upside is more of an indirect benefit of broader exposure and sales that are going to come from other places, because we're not selling, at least today, we're not selling the books directly. I don't know if Kris, if you want to add a perspective about how you see, the sort of exposure and what the sort of financial upside is for a publisher from participating in summary programs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess going back to the original question, yes, abstract companies are approaching traditional publishers or authors, I think in some cases even directly, to get the right to create an abstract. To create a summary. And that's definitely, the way it should be approached. As Andrew mentioned at the beginning, it's a derivative of the work itself, and that should be a licensed deal. I did say, we don't talk about what it's value for value exchange, obviously, in any kind of publishing arrangement, and we don't talk about what that is, but we definitely, you need to talk carefully to the person who's approaching you about a summary to understand what are the ways in which they will be working with you and your author to make this worthwhile.
Sure.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Just say, I do see a quick question in the chat about, besides business books, which obviously talked about a lot today, are there other kind of categories of content accessed by getAbstract customers or maybe summary consumers in general? Certainly business and leadership, professional development tend to be strong categories, in part because there's a market with the corporate audience. But as by way of example, for many years, getAbstract has produced a number of public domain summaries of public domain works, popular fiction and novels of historical value, works of philosophy, and do that in part as just sort of a public service. And those tend to be very, very popular, especially the company is Swiss and has a strong presence in Germany, and is a very well-loved resource for German students as they're trying to support their readership. But certainly the biggest category is business right now, but I think there's potential certainly in other categories as well.
And there is an important lesson to be learned about the ability to reach markets like the corporate market that, as Kris said, publishers traditionally do not approach or even have staffing to approach.
Right. Definitely.
Well, I think I'm going to walk around for the rest of the afternoon saying that if I want to reach the top shelf, I'm going to stand on the books that I read. So,
yes, I love that one.
Yeah, we're gonna carry Dennis around and
T-shirts.
just quote him whenever. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Fridge
gonna be
magnet, Dennis. Amazing.
Call my publisher, Dan. He's managing that quote for me.
all right. Perfect. Andrew, Dennis, Dan, Kris, thanks very much for doing this today. It was really helpful. Hopefully the audience has gotten as much as I did out of it. And I think it's someday, Andrew, we'll invite you back to tell us how it all comes together, because I'm sure there's a good story behind the scenes about creating those thousands of really interesting and compelling abstracts.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to do that. So thank you, Brian, and thank you to BISG for the opportunity to do this. And thank you very much to our panelists for sharing your time and your perspective.
Great. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye now.